Or the Assad family, like the Saudis and Binladens, and they they kill people's families. I mean, I've seen some pretty horrible things in my life, in documentaries, and everyone's seen car crashes and things like that on the motorway, which are horrifying. But what the what I saw in the documentary on Syria, um, was 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 really bad. I mean, I'm not I'm not ashamed to say I was almost moved to tears, to be honest. I mean, they're torturing kids, um, in detention centres. It's not that they can't go. The Assad family wouldn't go in and wipe out a family. They're selecting the weakest individuals, taking them off the street, even if they've done nothing wrong, and selecting them to terrorise the rest of the family. That's how they controlled Hezbollah. Hezbollah, as fighters, might be willing to die, or they might be willing to drive a suicide bomb, just like their rivals AlQueada from the Shia branch of the Jihadist movement. Hezbollah might be able to do that. Members might do that to Israelis and have no moral problem with that. But they're not going to risk their families, and that's how the Assad family and the Iranians controlled them. And so that's why it was so shocking recently that even Hamas, even though Hamas was set up by the Israelis, as a counterweight to the PLO, when the PLO was more powerful and doing more damage to the Israelis, but that Hamas has switched sides, and said that what the Assad's family are doing in Syria is wrong. But what Russia and China are doing is, as I said, is they're using the mad dog theory. We will stir it up and sacrifice one of our mad dogs to take out someone else. And of course, the Saudis and everybody else who's got an interest is either projecting onto the the protesters what they want. And I would say, I would like to project onto them that they are a part of a democratic movement that is pro-Western, and they are on Facebook and Twitter fighting for their freedom with the best weapons they have, which is the truth and reason. But of course, now you've come to a situation where the only communication is being done is through bullets and rocket-propelled grenades and bombs and everything else. And when that happens, that's a language that terrorist groups that are sponsored by Saudi Arabia or Iran or other groups, even the Israelis are not above co-opting other Islamist groups that they don't, without the Islamists knowing, and using them for their own reasons, because everyone has a stake in Syria. Russia's got billions of pounds worth of trade with them, as has China, in terms of military arms. It's a testing ground for Russian weapons, basically. And of course, the Syrians are the only Russian naval base in the Mediterranean, and the Russians aren't going to give up their foot in the sun. I mean, the Russian mentality is that they have been obsessing about recapturing Constantinople for Orthodox Christianity. I mean, and that even affected their policies during the Soviet era, when officially they were atheists. And of course, there's also the Russian interest, not Russian interest, but interest from Russia, because Russia has a massive Muslim population to keep happy, and of course an intelligentsia, which is a legacy from the Marxist era, which of course has some Zionist overtones. It's still there, I mean, Putin is on this issue definitely, you know, he's trying to, he might be facing down the Israelis one day to appeal to his Muslim critics, and then he's got Russian nationalists who probably don't want anything to do with it, or will only want something to do with it because they want to stick it to the Americans, you know, and the communists somewhere in between. You know, they still think they can sort of dominate the world and everything else like they did before and turn it into a concentration camp. The Assad family seems to be doing quite a good job on their own. And of course the Assad family, the Ba'athist party in Iraq under Saddam and the Assad regime is a legacy from the Stalinist era. You know, I mean, look at Saddam Hussein. His library was full of Italian shoes and books about Stalin. I mean, he even based his Republican guards on the NKVD and KGB. Right down to the moustache he was wearing. He was Stalin recreated in an Arabian guise, you know. Playing both the nationalist sentiment, even the jihadist sentiment, even though he tried to kill as many as he could to upset the Saudis. So the problem is that as much as the Iranians were sending their jihadists to Lebanon over the northwestern arc, and the Assad regime was able to export its Sunni jihadists, so they wouldn't be a problem for the Alawite regime. Now all of these groups are starting to come in, and they're, you know, to see maybe the Israelis would like a confrontation between Hezbollah and AlQueada and the Saudi elements, because it would really cause a bloodbath in Syria, and it would be probably what they would like. But the instability, of course, is going to affect them. And what happens if the Europeans come in and the Europeans solve the problems? Then a lot of regimes, especially Iran and Israel, are not going to like it, because the Americans from behind the scenes, without appearing to do so, can sort of advise the Europeans on what best to do, you know, vis-a-vis Israel. And the Europeans can help the Americans sort of deal with the Iranian issue, because of course the Europeans, they want a Middle Eastern Union and a North African Union to be tangential to a European Union, and that would be a kind of based on the European Union, no, in an Arabian guise, secular, democratic, free trade zone, possibly with one single currency, and Turkey probably in it, in the Middle Eastern Union. And that is not what Russia wants, or Iran. Okay, now what is the feasibility of going into Syria? Some people would say that was the worst possible thing that anyone could do, because their interest it wouldn't be in their interest to do it. But I think the Turks will have to choose a path here as well. They're a growing power. They're going to be more powerful than Saudi Arabia soon in terms of economics, and they have a very powerful European supplied military and US trained military. They could go in and make safe areas, and the Syrians have crossed their border, and I'm sure the Russians don't want that, because if the Russians have sold them any arms, they start seeing the new batch of Leopard 2s and Eurofighters in Turkish hands going across the border and smashing their armaments up. Russia's not going to have an armaments trade in the Middle East, and that's what really Putin is worried about, because of the greater effect of not having that Syrian counterweight there. Stops Russia having any influence in the Mediterranean and bottles them up. China, of course, knows that if Syria's not there, then Iran is next. Thanks for listening.